The orchestration of The Chase is pared down compared to Planet of Giants. That earlier score, though, is quite similar in character to The Chase, much more so than The Crusade. Simpson's small ensemble of 6 musicians consisted of clarinet and bass clarinet, cello, guitar, piano, organ, celeste, mallet percussion, and percussion. To make The Chase sweet, I had to decide what musical cues would fit best together to make a coherent piece. Obviously, since the suite started out life as nothing more than the title theme, I had to include any other music that used that melody as a basis. 2 additional longer cues and 1 short cue are born from the title theme, and these cues are important musical anchors of the suite. I was also attracted to 2 other motives that recur in the score. Firstly, there are 2 angular unison lines, which feature stings made of clarinet trills and piano and percussion tremolos. Secondly, there are 2, admittedly unrelated, tense chordal passages that made good musical connective tissue. Finally, I did make an attempt to place the cues in story order, and this worked out by and large. I'll discuss each cue in turn. The Chase itself opens with a reprise of the previous episode, the surprise appearance of a Dalek announcing their plans to find and exterminate the TARDIS crew. This scene ends with the first of the 2 angular stings, as it happens, never to be heard again in that story. So that's how the suite gets started. The tension emanating from this line is from its tritone intervals. Further, this line shoots up dramatically, an octave and a half. A clarinet trills at the peak note, A, and underneath, the piano pounds out a tritone-related chord made of C major plus added notes that imply F sharp major. The roots of these 2 chords are a tritone apart from each other. More on that later. The title theme begins with a suspended chord on A, played by guitar with drums and tambourine accompaniment. The suspense of the chord comes from the fact that it is neither major nor minor, but could theoretically be about to resolve there. Jazzers would shorthand this chord as E minor 7 over A. The melody is played by both hands of the piano, 2 octaves apart, with a response by the bass clarinet. I was able to incorporate this orchestration despite having to play the harmony with both hands also. The shape of the melody suggests A major, but note how this melody denies the underlying suspended harmony, not only in the deliberate use of the major third, but the tritone and the augmented fifth. After 2 statements of this phrase, the melody rises quickly through the harmonic minor scale with an augmented 4th passing tone, anticipating the change of harmony to come. This chord change arrives on the downbeat, and it could be thought of as the resolution of the suspension. To execute the melody and harmony together, I had to move this chord up 1 inversion, so it's not quite accurate in terms of the register of the chord as recorded. But I decided it was better to have all the notes, because playing in the correct register meant the chord's E natural was just impossible for my hand to play. The title theme finishes with a rhythmic chordal fade out in the same C major, F sharp major harmony that the opening cue ends with, cementing that harmony as a key element of the score. After a brief pause, the rising A harmonic minor segment of the melody forms the body of a sting heard only once in episode 2 when the Iridians tell the Doctor that soon he and Barbara will be given into their custody. The Daleks, that is. The piano melody in the program is again played 2 octaves apart, but if I wanted to play the bass clarinet and cello line in the left hand, that melody would have to be compacted to just 1 octave in the right hand. Like the opening angular sting, a trilled note is executed in my arrangement by passing the note from one hand to another to start the trill so that something else can be played. In this case, a repeated high C natural by the xylophone. The trill ends, and this leads into the first new version of the title theme melody, played by the organ, supported with chordal punctuations by the guitar, a very subtle bass clarinet, and a cool rhythmic groove by what I'm pretty sure is a pair of finger cymbals, also known as Zills. This music is heard twice in episode 2. Firstly, when a Meyer Beast attack on the Iridian city allows the Doctor, Barbara, and Vicky to escape captivity. Secondly, as Dalek Fred, or Dalek Archie, depending on whom you ask, is lured away from guarding the TARDIS and into a trap by the taunting of Ian and the rest. This music was a fun challenge to translate to piano. I was inspired to use the highest reaches of the piano to imitate the finger cymbal sound, using a cluster of the top 3 notes, A sharp, B, C. That meant that all melody and harmony would be the left hand's job alone. Happily, both elements happen in the same register. The melody starts virtually identically to the title theme, except the original C sharp becomes C natural here. After the initial 2-part phrase, the melody develops in a similarly shaped vein. Like the title theme, however, the notes don't always relate to the harmony. The first of the guitar punctuations, with the melody note F, is a juicy and unsettled D-flat augmented chord with a major 7th. The second punctuation, with the melody notes suggesting a G minor phrase ending on B-flat, is a simple C augmented chord, the melody note adding the dominant 7th. The third is an E minor chord with added 9th, and the melody note adding the 6th. The melody itself is almost a literal transposition of the previous phrase, save for the first note E, so this phrase suggests diminished harmony. This tension is accentuated by the more active repetition of the phrase, denying the downbeats of the chord punctuations. Because the melody became more active, some chords had to be left out of my arrangement so they wouldn't obscure the melody. This pushes us towards the climax of this cue. The organ's insistent, repeated chords are another augmented chord with major 7th, this time on A flat. This could be an F minor major 9 harmony, but if there's an F in the cello or the bass clarinet, I can't hear it. Cleverly, the result of these rhythmically pressing phrases place all of these dramatic chords on offbeats rather than on downbeats. That is, beats 2 and 4 of a major rather than 1 and 3, creating an unconscious off-balance for the listener. The organ also has a teasing, grace-noted melody, a tritone in between each dramatic chord, so the left hand has a tough job playing these accurately at speed. After a brief pause, the second angular sting signals a transition of compositional tone, again made of tritones and jumping wide intervals. This time, the sting comes from a tremolo harmony in the piano, reinforced in the program by a single-note xylophone tremolo. Unlike the initial sting, heard at the very beginning only, this second sting is heard more often. First heard in episode 1, when the Doctor and Barbara discover a Dalek transmission on the time-space visualizer, it's heard a second time moments after the cue just discussed, in episode 2, where the Doctor and company's relief at trapping the Dalek is cut short upon spotting a Dalek contingent ready to fire. They dash into the TARDIS and escape. The piano tremolo is another instance of the C major, F sharp major harmony. The left hand's chord actually contains D sharp, rather than the C sharp found in an F sharp major triad. This type of harmony comes from a scale called, variously, a diminished scale or an octatonic scale. The latter name comes from the fact that the scale contains 8 notes before reaching the end of the scale, compared to major and minor that contain only 7 notes. Like the whole tone scale I discussed in episode 9 of the project, this scale is also symmetrical, made of a repeating pattern of half-step, whole-step cells. What this translates to is that the scale contains 4 major and 4 minor chords, all quite different from each other, that can make very rich, dissonant, yet understandable musical colors. The tremolos combining C major with D sharp minor, or F sharp major, is just such a color made from the diminished scale. Jazz improvisers love this scale, as did Stravinsky, Debussy, Messiaen, and plenty of modern composers. At the cliffhanger to episode 3 and the reprise in episode 4, this tremolo sound is heard separate from the angular line that preceded it and leads into a spooky chord theme played by the piano with additional chords by the celeste, a keyboard instrument that sounds like delicate bells. The most famous use of this instrument is probably the Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy from Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker. I call it a chord theme because every single sound is a triadic chord. The right hand's chords are all on the white keys, starting from simple C major and jumping up to E minor and G major. This elementary piano sound is subverted by the low chord held underneath, C sharp minor. An intentional dissonance with simple musical materials, of the sort we now know is a Simpson hallmark. This chord jumping happens twice, with a couple more repeated chords the second time. After each, the celeste offers higher register triads, foreign not only to the C sharp minor foundation, but also the jumping white key chords. These pairs of chords, related by minor thirds, also suggest the diminished scale I mentioned earlier. Although this chord theme has nothing to do with the title theme, this short passage was so interesting to me that I had to include it in the suite. It's essentially 3 separate parts that make sense on their own, but when superimposed with each other, make fascinating musical colors. For completeness, I should mention that this first chord theme is the last thing we hear in episode 6. The adventure over, we watch the TARDIS flying through the vortex. Cue credits. No, not you! Sorry about that. Most of the piece has been in the same tempo so far, but now that changes. A second chord theme has a slower tempo, coupled with a change from 4/4 to 6/4 time. Really, 3 big beats, a la 3/2 time. A bit of this cue is heard as a ghost passes through Ian's body in the episode 4 haunted house sequence. The complete cue is heard in episode 5 as the Doctor, Barbara, and Vicky sleep in the cave on Mechanus. A camera descends from the ceiling to observe them. Again, this cue is all about chords. Firstly, we get 3 measures of the same harmony in extended crescendo. The harmony is D dominant 7th in the right hand, with G sharp menacingly pulsing by the bass clarinet in the left. This is the very same tritone-related harmony heard earlier, but instead of C and F sharp, it's D and G sharp that are the 2 roots. The cue finishes with an amalgam of that sound, D7 flat 5. That's another chord we spent some time on in episode 9 of the project. Meanwhile, on top of this are more bouncing parallel triads. This time, the relationship between the triads is not minor thirds or tritones, as we heard previously, but major thirds. Yet, the ending B chord with the D7 flat 5 does in fact relate to diminished scale harmony. Suddenly, after these 2 ambiguous chord themes, we get action. A new, much faster development of the title theme underscores the dramatic Episode 5 buildup, as, trapped in the cave surrounded by advancing Daleks, the four discuss how they could escape. The Doctor takes matters into his own hands and leaves the cave without telling his companions. The clarinet and guitar double the melody throughout, with organ supplying harmony, the cello supplying bass accents, and the snare drum providing unrelenting rhythmic drive. Because the snare drum is such an important constant part of this music, and the organ harmony is largely long-held sounds, I decided to compose a left-hand line that would incorporate all these elements, particularly the 8th and 16th note drive of the drums. So the low notes are the bass pulses, and all other notes are snare drum. The melody begins with the same title theme melody, but down 1/2 step from the original, aligning it more with the D bass, and again suggesting augmented whole tone harmony. The second phrase alters the melodic shape slightly. Beginning on A, the original title theme note, the last two notes are a 1/2 step up from their originals, landing on F sharp, the major third of D. With the preceding E flat and F natural, the harmony is back to suggesting diminished scale colors. Yet, the second half of the phrase uses C sharp nevertheless, again denying the underlying harmony. These long phrases are next broken up by 4 measures of rhythmic repeated notes above thickening harmony. It begins with the return of the C major F sharp major harmony for 2 measures. In the second 2 measures, the melody rises to A sharp, as does the bass note to D sharp. I must admit to being beaten as to the harmony. The music itself is mixed rather quietly, and the dialogue, etc., covers it up effectively. I just had to guess. Since the following 2 measures are a musical deep breath, holding a single F sharp major C major chord, the inversion of the earlier harmony, I could make an intelligent guess that diminished scale harmony was going on here too. So I tried to make a reasonable left-hand chord that would connect these 2 sounds. Incidentally, the deep breath measures feature a cymbal crash that I decided to translate to piano. With the diminished scale in mind, I created 2 cluster chords that add up to all 8 notes of the diminished scale. That seemed suitably crashing and dissonant. Acting as a dominant chord, the F sharp resolves in normal fashion to B in the bass. However, the melody continues its augmented shape, this time starting also on B. The bass and harmony start to change more quickly now. After only 4 measures of B, plus most of a 5th measure, the bass shifts to E, acting like another dominant chord. The melody changes in shape slightly, with the initial notes starting on E, but then a repeated E and neighbor F reflect the E dominant then A minor harmony. A juicy note choice is the melodic leap up a tritone, as always, but to A sharp or B flat, 1/2 step away from the root of A minor. The melody ends with its usual shape, and this resolves nicely to the minor third of A. The rhythmic repeated notes intercede again, leading to a dramatic B flat minor major 7 chord under the repeated Cs. The Cs leap once to E flat, then do it again, with a final E flat, a unison accent, which brings a sudden halt to this action cue. To make a perfect, to me, ending to the suite, there was one other bit of music I had to use. Going back to episode 3, during the chaotic scenes where the Daleks cause the abandonment of the ship Mary Celeste, there's this wonderful, arching, falling line that concludes a much longer cue. However, this ending phrase is used alone several other times. Almost immediately, as the last sailor is frightened off the ship. then twice in episode 5 after a Dalek shoots a fungoid, and then after the Doctor fights and deactivates his robot double. This cue is all unison in triple octaves. It peaks at the same E flat just heard, which seemed to make it all the more perfect. The line falls from there in a brilliantly haphazard way down almost 4 octaves. The first 3 notes outline an augmented triad, while the next 3 outline C sharp minor. It crash lands on a low register D major chord. The clarinet finishes with 4 trills over this D chord. The primary note is F sharp, the major third, but the trill note is E sharp, making a wry conclusion to this goofy suite. Like the chase itself, it brings a smile to my face. Bless you for watching episode 12, part 2 of the Dudley Simpson is Doctor Who project. Next time, another piece from The Chase. Subscribe, like, share, and comment. See you next time. Bah!